Few points before anything on what this debate is not about. We tell you it's not about radical, blatant antisocial behaviors. This can look like the most objective form of antisocial behaviors that everyone holistically would classify as and consider bad. This looks like saying racial slurs directly to minority groups. I think to separate subjective and antisocial behaviors and blatant objective ones is necessary because most people don't commit these blatant antisocial behaviors that the opposing side will probably talk about because we've been taught like how to be civil and how to treat others. This is literally the point of education, and everyone goes through education insofar as the state does have like public education and can teach other people these things. Secondly, if these people commit these actions, they're likely to be persecuted. They're likely to be like held accountable by the public, by the general like public people. And like if you're committing this crime in public, of course everyone's gonna like say you're a bad person or whatever. So you're not likely to do these sort of actions. Secondly, then, all this debate is about and differentiating what's legal and not and illegal and illegal. On how we would ban certain aspects, such as drunk driving causing an accident, on how we're going to ban certain aspects, we tell you for example, drunk driving causing an accident is an actual harm and criminal, but simply being drunk should not be criminalized as it would not be causing damage to others. Swearing and racist language are almost free speech issues, except for like the most blatant racism. Rioting is also a form of free speech, but if it gets to the destruction of property, we tell you that is a direct problem and what proposition does not stand for. In terms of vandalism, though, the issue in this debate is the differentiation between the destruction of property, which we consider bad, and a broader interpretation of vandalism that includes parody. A political sign where someone adds on like post-its for like devil horns would be parody and free speech in props world, but would be punished in opposition's world. We have to say though that these laws wouldn't work in almost all these laws like wouldn't work in almost all countries, and even authoritarian groups won't be able to weaponize this law as a whole, which I'll get into my argumentation. Therefore, our stance is clear. Actual physical harm is a fair line for criminal charges. This motion clearly doesn't include these factors. Therefore, this debate is not about whether or not harming others or property should be criminalized, because it should be. This debate is about whether we should criminalize non-violent behavior as a whole. Proposition says no, and opposition has a burden to prove why the authoritarian creep of government controlling more of our lives is beneficial, which I'll get to in my first argument. What is my first argument? My first argument states that the government can modify the inherent definition of what is civil or not, and we tell you that's incredibly bad. Few points then on characterization first. Notice that the definition of what is considered like antisocial behaviors varies by states, and this becomes an incredibly dangerous law that the state can weaponize, especially in authoritarian countries. Because what's defined as racist language isn't objective at a certain point. We know this based off intuition as said in the framing. For example, like the state of Israel's definition of anti-Semitism is going against the Israeli state as a whole. Whether you support Israel or not, this does not count. We all know this isn't the actual definition we should aim for, and the state can clearly weaponize this. I'll explain this later though, on why this is actually so bad. Because notice that you can inherently limit people's freedom of speech. At the point where you can't say certain arguments or go against the state because they can directly persecute you, because the state manipulates the definition to directly persecute you, like Israel does in my example, and have tangible actual against actions against you. Like it's important because there will be no other methods I think this is incredibly important because like on our world there's no methods that the state can persecute with subjective definitions. They're likely to use this law against their people because they can directly go against like what's like unfavorable for the state, but it's a principal injustice because it counts as a breaching of freedom of speech. I don't think that opposition is necessarily going to go against freedom of speech, but my DPM is likely to mechanize if they do. We can tell you on the comparative on our world, there is no valid argument that the state can impose and directly persecute and hold you in court with and send you to jail. I think what the state can really do in our world is just watch as the riots or like not the like direct riots, like the protests happen, because they can't actually persecute and modify the definitions of what's like civil injustice is. Second argument then on how misdemeanor is a natural occurrence and it's kind of like stupid to kind of limit it. Notice that minor misdemeanor behavior is literally banned on their side and is a natural outcome. Antisocial behavior like swearing or being drunk are like the most common things that humans do in the first place. Let me frame this correctly. We aren't saying that we should establish a vice city like where like all hell breaks loose. That's not the point of this debate. Op will have you believe that when we do penalize people for these petty things, the world will suddenly be in order. However, we hardly believe that this to be true. Why? Notice that Korea classifies as drugs as a crime, but guess what? Drugs are the most common types of crime in Korea. We see more outbreaks of these steps under opposition's world because it's human nature that if someone restricts you from doing something, you want to do it even more. That's the exclusive harm they have. Also, furthermore, sure, let's say that they somehow frame this correctly. However, then are you going to put fines on comedians for making like racist jokes and people drinking beer at a sports bar? I don't think this is a likely characterization. And the level of restriction that the op has a burden to impose is not necessarily good. Secondly, we tell you that on-side proposition, we argue that these actions are the most prevalent occurrences. Kids literally swear. I swear, like adults swear, even the most sagacious people, like popes, swear. We can't necessarily penalize them. And like on our side, we don't see any action happening on any action happening at all. I think this is incredibly important because notice that we don't actually enforce any of these values, even if the crime is implemented, such as the UK, where you can go and litter all you want, and everyone just blames it on on other circumstances that they have no control on. And I think because we're implementing a law, it looks like we're solving these like what we consider like direct problems, such as littering or whatever, but we don't actually impose any. Since we don't actually impose anything, like no action already happens. When people say that when people talk about the problem of littering, we literally say that it's already being solved because it's a law, but the law isn't enforced at all, so it gives a false sense of security because nothing is happening at all, and therefore no actual change, I don't know, such as more garbage trucks or whatever is going to actually happen. In conclusion, I think we win under two circumstances. First, we literally limit like direct authoritarianism via limitations of freedom of speech that other states can potentially impose, and secondly, we characterize misdemeanor as a natural occurrence that just naturally happens, and they have a burden to defend it. For all these reasons, so proud to stand in an open government.
Step forward, 3 steps back. The minimal and mundane governmental regulations that would exist on OG are inadequate in preventing the plethora of possible misdemeanors with irreversible consequences for the most vulnerable. For all this, so proud to oppose. Few things in my speech. First, some setup, then rebuttals, and then our first two arguments. Firstly, about the necessity of antisocial behavior orders, and secondly, about conforming social norms and expectations, and generally what is seen as acceptable and unacceptable. Firstly, with setup them. We would want to clarify what antisocial behavior orders look like. Note that a lot of the time, people are not fined or penalized when their actions were not direct violations or nuisances to society. So obviously, if someone was just drunk but home alone and went to work the next day completely sober, then that person wouldn't be punished, because what nuisance is he being to society? What harm is he necessarily doing to other people? The entire purpose of antisocial behavior orders is to ensure that people are not engaging in behavior that directly or clearly harms others. Obviously, that would be things like racist or sexist languages and actions. Then what exactly do ASBOs look like in status quo? They can take several forms, such as preventing an individual from drinking alcohol in the streets, and it can also limit physical contact, like someone being banned from seeing a specific other person for at least 2 years. Violations of these crimes obviously lead to fines. I'll take that POI later. That being said, we're still willing to take a harder stance. So as long as someone is swearing, drinking, or saying offensive comments in public, they will be punished because they're probably having some harm to other people. That being said, then, what is the main metric of this debate? We say that this debate should primarily be about protecting public safety and protecting the most vulnerable stakeholders. And obviously, the entire nature of these misdemeanors and wrong actions is that they usually target these minorities. OG is already boxed out of this debate because their only alternative to these antisocial actions is just existing governmental regulations. Before moving on, I'll take a POI from opening.
Okay, you're defending this world where people aren't being fined and penalized. You have the laws but no enforcement. How's this good?
We are defending a world where people are the whole thing with ASBOs is that if you're caught doing a misdemeanor or if you're caught being a nuisance to public, then you are penalized. So I don't get why that POI necessarily is relevant. Moving on to responses then, obviously, firstly on OG. Their main contribution is that a lot of these things and a lot of these ASBOs infringes free speech, but that also misdemeanors are natural. Firstly, about the notion that the state deciding what is antisocial and what is not can be harmful, we completely reject this idea. We would argue that the state is the only actor that has enough power and authority to actively disincentivize and deter individuals from doing these bad actions. And on top of that, although I'll explain more on this in my first constructive, we say that some people are just unaware of the consequences of their actions, and clear punishments just have to show this and have to make people learn about them. But secondly, About the idea that, like misdemeanor is natural and shouldn't be limited, we do agree that there is nothing wrong with spending a Friday night at home after a long week of work with a glass of wine with some good friends. But there is a line that has to be drawn, and we find it unacceptable that OG has no clear governmental regulations, as we already proved that current ones are inadequate against such bad actions that may not be so blatant. The conclusion here is that not all misdemeanors or wrong actions are blatant or are already punished by law. Racist slurs, for example, with more nuances, are often more harmful but are not clearly punished in status quo. Therefore, moving on to our first argument then about the necessity of antisocial behavior orders. 3 questions to ask here then. Firstly, why are ASBOs needed? We say that a lot of times people do not hesitate or think twice about the consequences of their actions. For example, some people say racist and sexist slurs to crack jokes and get good laughs out of other people, but know that they are only able to do this because they are part of the majority or because they don't think about what the people that are actually affected by the joke or people that are offended by the joke might actually feel. But also, oftentimes the nature of antisocial behavioral actions themselves just make someone irrational. If you are drunk, then you should not be driving around or teetering through the streets in public, barely managing to walk in a straight line. Drunkenness gets people to do irrational things, especially when they're in public and are especially more of a nuisance to society. But secondly, why is this especially important? We see that when it comes to deterrence, tangible civil punishments are the best way to deter people from doing certain actions. Let's analyze some stakeholders here. A lot of people that go around doing these things really don't care because existing checks and balances that OG already talked about and CG probably will mention are simply inadequate. They don't care that people will look at that weird and that people will be like, oh, who are those stupid people walking through the streets and are drunk? They don't care that their reputation might be ruined a little. That's just the nature of the people that are willing to do these actions in the first place. Therefore, note that our world makes much of the difference with clear punishments like fines, prohibitions that are much large scale and much stricter than they were on government benches. These are tangible things that are also pretty harsh and hard to avoid. Like I said in my setup, these penalties look like completely stopping people from entering certain places or even accessing certain privileges that make life more convenient. I think if I were one of those people, I would try to improve my behavior. Last question, what impacts do ASBOs ensure? Obviously, public safety is the main thing here. Public safety is crucial, but antisocial behavior simply ruins that. Dangerous driving behaviors that could possibly or perhaps already have caused several accidents are unacceptable. The people that commit these crimes are actively subjecting innocent third-party individuals to the consequences of their irrational and stupid actions. Moving on to our second argument then about conforming social norms and expectations. Premise here is that especially for younger individuals or younger generations, if these people never see others who model such bad behavior being punished, this sets a precedent that even if it is bad for their health, and even if it is not a preferable form of behavior, it is accepted and considered as okay or surpassing standards that government has set. To utilize the mechanism here then. Firstly, social norms provide a basic framework for acceptable and non-acceptable behavior. This means even though there aren't legally mandated regulations, society set these specific standards, and when they are not met, it's viewed as an erosion of social order and something that does have to be punished. If we do follow these norms, social norms create expectations for behavior, ensuring a sense of responsibility among individuals. When people conform to these rules, they hold themselves and others accountable for their actions, reinforcing out of order the importance of socially tolerable and undisruptive conduct. If people have these expectations set, it sets a pathway to clearly distinguish what is considered okay and not okay, which in the future becomes a clear structure for future generations to refer to. What does this look like? To frame this, if younger children walk around streets where people are drunk and swearing, spitting out curse words, and this slowly becomes a widespread form of behavior in that community, commonly found across the entire nation, this becomes a recurring problem and have a bad model in which if children do look up to this or grow surrounded in this form of behavior that never necessarily gets punished or is told as a bad thing, that only becomes worse. A parallel example would be something like a ghetto community, where because from a very young part of their lives, these children are only surrounded by the same people doing the same bad actions, there are numerically a greater amount of kids and youth who grow up to follow these similar behaviors. Impact here, on the comparative, if ASBO is not punished, then if these behavioral orders are not punished, social norms shift to set guidelines and goes on as far as to say that this is okay. What kind of precedent does it set for future generations and the youth who grow up to be surrounded by this behavior and normalize this behavior? Their mind perceives cussing, drinking, and causing a social nuisance to be tolerable and standardizes this form of behavior. For all this, never been prouder to oppose.
Trying to control how people act, which is what literally op needs to prove, is ridiculous when held beyond not harming others. Let me do some reframing first of all. This debate is not about whether or harming others or property should be criminalized. This debate is about if we should criminalize non-violent behavior. We as government say this is stupendous. Ops here, he still needs to prove why the authoritarian creep of a government controlling more and more of our lives is still beneficial. I hope the DLO still to this, although it's quite late, which is rejected by the PM. Now, with that being said, I'll move on. It's okay for some people to stay at home to drink. However, let's face the reality. How many clubs do you think exist in the entire world? How many people do night outs and drink parties outside? This is not only symmetrical on our side, but this is also equivalent on their side. Additionally, they said that they're somehow going to mitigate antisocial behaviors and prevent individuals from going to streets. However, JS literally told you that this is not happening in the UK as of right now. Governments are unable to control their literal streets from literally getting solicited, and this is completely irrelevant to this debate, and this is not happening, and OP cannot do this. Additionally, they say that people have other points about governments and how some people are just magically aware. Thailand literally sends people to jail for publicly criticizing their king. This is literally our first argument about governments can literally do and manage their own ways of how to penalize these people, and governments can be corrupt and do anything to the people and say what is which is right and wrong that you can do in the public. How does this make any sense for the ops case? This simply comes down to their first argument about necessity and antisocial behavior orders. They say that people do not think twice, and by regulating these things, people somehow magically will be able to think twice. Okay, first of all, Jace already told you that penalizing someone will make them so that they want to go around and cut corners even more, right? This is not rebutted against. I hope the DLO comes up and somehow mitigates against this. We already told you that people are willing to do more if you regulate them. If you ban someone from doing drinking, they're going to find some way to drink even more, right? Because you can't stop them. Additionally, they say they can provide tangible measures like putting people in jails and doing fines. Okay, first of all, how does this make any sense if it's a natural outcome that everyone swears, right? Are you going to put shoes on their mouth for swearing? Are you going to fine them? How does this make any sense under any law? It's right to freedom to say what you want. Sure, this may be wrong on some degrees that you might infringe others' rights or other person's rights. However, how is this any good if the government is literally fining everyone and doing tangible punishments for everyone, literally using all their subsidies to go track down people who swear? How does it make any sense? Additionally, they say that they can teach the young people and how some people have to learn, how some people have to see and watch and learn and what is wrong and what is not. However, okay, smoking campaigns exist on their world. However, this does not do any good because people still smoke, right? Showing people that this is bad is good, but this doesn't do anything. Additionally, sure, then are you going to penalize moms for swearing in front of their child and put them into jails, putting an emotional PTSD? This doesn't make any sense. Additionally, Nayoon said that this is just fine with fines and prohibition. And how did this prohibition of alcohol work in the US in the 1920s? We see more drinking happen, but unregulated, and there's people unregulated and untaxed, right? Completely failure of policy, and that is what wants in this debate. Now, with that being said, are there any POIs? I'll take that as a completely engagement coming from the opposition side here. Now, with that being said, I'll move on to a third argument, which is government is going to face on why this might even be worse, right? Let's approach this on ops world, where the laws are put anti-social behavior is going to increase. We already told you about US doing humanity in the 1920s not only increased, but led to several governmental deterioration, if not worse, and legal activities will increase. Why is this true? Because people are going to fire back. Because more you impose something and more you do something, it's adding these laws. This is like driving in public and public being normalized in European countries like in Germany. At this point, in which is so normalized, notice that there's much outrage that can potentially happen. Because when you take something that isn't objectively wrong as drinking, or at the very least, people think aren't objectively wrong, then there will be three main harms. What is this like? First, this reactance theory, right? Notice that if something is banned and enforced, people naturally want to do more, right? When people feel that their autonomy or freedom is threatened, such as through a ban or a restriction or a fine, it leads to more psychological reactions. Furthermore, the feeling of exclusivity, the feeling that you're doing something but others people are not. For example, when you swear and you get a fine and you go to jail. But however, on the other side of the world, people say like racist jokes. Comedians are able to make racist jokes and people conform to that. These are going to be people are going to feel that their autonomy or freedom is threatened. Additionally, second, how you can't have mitigatory laws, right? Drunkenness is different from underage drinking, right? Underage drinking laws are intended to protect minors who are considered more valuable to the physical, mental, and social risk associated with alcohol. This is different from where you are of an age and you can physically drink without health harms. The importance here is that since the activity of drinking is illegal as a whole, you have nothing to lose. Mentally, you think of the act as doing something illegal as symmetrical. Therefore, more underage drinking happens, they somehow say. This looks like US prohibition area, which I've already mentioned. 3, think about the government spending you need, right? To ban action that everyone commits and everyone doesn't support will take so much money. I think I already mentioned this in my rebuttals, but I extend, right? That these monies that are used to track down drunk people on the streets or people having parties or people literally saying a simple swear word or comedians saying a racist joke could be useful in more beneficial factors such as like housing crisis, right? There are bigger problems in the world rather than stopping people from making a dark joke. In proper world, we told you that there's more important things and these petty crimes happen as a normal day outcome. No matter it's going to increase, which is going unrebutted against by the prop side. And that's why we take the debate in this round. Thank you.
I think OG is confused as to what ASBOs actually look like. If you use your basic human decency and make the conclusion that you only smoke in those small chambers that are set up for smokers, then you will not be punished. But if you're smoking in front of an elementary school where kids are pouring out because it's at the end of the day, then you are being a nuisance to society and you are being antisocial. OG can't win the debate without necessarily understanding what these regulations look like in the first place. So proud to oppose. Directly moving on to rebuttals. First, on their claim on how penalization infringes on freedom of speech. We think it's okay to infringe to a certain extent of this freedom when this speech that incites violence or discrimination against these particular groups based on race, religion, ethnicity, or gender or whatnot. This infringement has an aim to protect these vulnerable populations and maintain the social harmony. And what about the third-party harm that's actually caused from this small action of social satisfaction or just having a small laugh amongst your friends? I'll take that later. If you and your friends are having a small laugh because of that dark joke, if that's what you get out of making other vulnerable populations feel hurt, what do you necessarily get out of that? Now, next, second on their claim on how social norms already punish people. Two main problems here. Some people don't care about how the public perceives them in the first place, whether they're crazy, weird, or insane. They don't care as long as they get that momentary satisfaction and short-term content that they're getting from this cussing and drinking. But next, if social norms are dependent on a world where being a social nuisance to society is tolerated by quote-unquote existing preventive measures that literally do nothing, what kind of social norms are they in the first place? Are these behaviors of drinking and cussing normalized? Probably yes, because these social norms are as meaningless as government enforcement, where they are as weak. Yes, what's your PLI?
The Israeli definition of anti-Semitism is going against the Israeli state as a whole. Do you support this definition of racism?
I really don't understand how this is really relevant to this specific cause for the debate, because the point being that you guys are giving us an alternative where existing preventive measures is simply doing nothing. And on a broader scale, Israel isn't really necessarily relevant to this debate. And we're talking about how this antisocial behavior caused on a regular public scale, on a macro scale, actually impacts the world. Finally, on their claim that in status quo, they're already implementing measures, campaigning or whatnot, and this doesn't work, so there's no guarantee that our measures will work. Note that campaigns are suggestions made by NGOs, NPOs, or the government to suggest some form of behavior, but when there's actual legal enforcement, there's penalization consequences that follow along. And note that this is the mechanization that they give us to suggest why our alternative is not feasible. But the counterfactual that we propose in the first place does work, because there's a different level of campaigning where it's not reinforced. But then as for legal enforcements, you have this duty to follow because you're a legal citizen. Now, 2 points before directly going into my extension. First, OG's main line of logic is that because these laws are not enforced to an extent, people will do these actions, and these are mundane actions. Lots of people don't go around cussing or drinking because they don't care about the current limitation and the quote-unquote check and balances that that government benches refer to. That being said, the only reason these stakeholders don't care about these check and balances is because they're inadequate and not significant, and hence government can't simply argue, oh, it's okay to this extent, because they don't care what the public thinks they are. They don't care about how others perceive them, and note that this realistic characterization coming from my elbow was entirely not responded nor engaged by my DPM. Now next, how do we entirely box OG out of this debate? Even if they are correct to a certain extent, note that this is the even if case in terms of their characterization of how antisocial behavior orders do not deter people from further crimes. That doesn't eliminate the fact that OG completely depends on existing preventive measures of government measures. So even if we do infringe on freedom of speech or other various types of freedom that are important, that doesn't necessarily give them an alternative that works, and hence they can't really mitigate the harms that we give them about like deterrent crimes or about how this sets a bad precedent for the youth, because their alternative is unable to mitigate these harms. So we need that engagement, but it necessarily wasn't present. Now moving on to our team's third and final extension on deterrence. Let's quickly characterize the way that antisocial behaving people perceive things. They cuss, they drink, and the government claims the existing government enforcement will punish them promptly when needed. If they aren't punished because the government turns a blind eye, quote unquote, to avoid infringing on a freedom of expression, does the government actually play their role in terms of protecting vulnerable populations because they are hurt and they are sad simply because they were called these racial and sexual slurs? But do these vulnerable populations receive any kind of protection? No, because we see if government depends on these existing preventive measures that are in status quo, this means that their world will look exactly similar, identical to status quo. And do we get any form of protection or compensation for these racial or sexual slurs saying people? Do we have any kind of protection for these vulnerable people in status quo? No, this goes as far to say that governments, like OG's alternative that they proposed within the first half of this debate is completely meaningless. Now moving on to mechanization for deterrence. As for the individual who commits the crimes themselves, it reinforces the idea that individuals are responsible and should be held accountable for their actions. When people know that a certain behavior will lead to penalties, they're more likely to think twice before engaging in harmful actions, and this sense of accountability is lost in the status quo, and that's what we keep as OO. But small crimes can even lead to more serious offenses if they leave unchecked, because by addressing these minor crimes, these smaller ones, society can prevent a pattern of behavior that escalates into more significant criminal activity. And that being said, OG's superficial line of logic that bigger crimes are penalized anyway is a quite negligent way of thinking, because if these criminals perceive these smaller ones to be unaccounted for and unpunished, when these smaller ones accumulate to create a bigger one, then what do they perceive this as? The bigger one also won't be as heavily punished because they don't care about the smaller ones as well. Government regulations do not address smaller actions and misdemeanors, which again, people have no incentive to stop doing, and that's why they lose the point on public safety. Penalties often serve as a deterrent. On their comparative, removing them could result in more people engaging in disruptive behaviors without fear of repercussions, potentially escalating these issues. And when these smaller crimes accumulate going unnoticed by the eye of the government, what impression does this set and what precedent does it give to the general public? Unresponded to when my LO talked about this, but more importantly, what does it say to the drunk cussing person? Committing a slightly bigger crime won't result in that bigger of a punishment, and that's what they think. But what's the simple one-liner response OG gives us? Oh no, existing government enforcements will do the job, and you guys are infringing on the people's freedom of speech, and social norms will do the job. What social norms will do the job when there is no social norm, and cussing, drinking in front of young kids are seen as not unusual? Lastly, then, why does our case win the debate, winning against any government benches, but also boxing out CO from the beginning? Judge, if you took anything away from the opening half of this debate, it should be the three following points. Firstly, we improve public safety. We have already told you that the main metric of this debate should be based on protecting the most vulnerable stakeholders and the ones that are most exposed to nuanced racial slurs that we tangibly and clearly penalize. Second, we alter social norms and expectations. We enhance the narrative that misdemeanors might not necessarily be illegal and should be punished and are inherently bad. Finally, we give the incentive to the people that usually commit these antisocial actions, and we give you the correct characterization of these individuals, and we deter them from committing these crimes again, because the punishments of lost privileges and other harms play a much larger role in these people's mindset. For these reasons, so proud to oppose.
Anybody in this debate really addresses why people commit these aggressions, why people commit these antisocial behaviors in the very first place. Notice how OG is really uncharitable with OO's characterization on how antisocial behaviors actually harm people, okay? We will be the side that actually engages to this and give even if rebuttals, saying how we still manage to beat their case, okay? So first point of analysis, I First point of characterization, I think that antisocial behavior really doesn't have much harm against others. So sending these people to jail isn't going to bring much incapacitation, isn't really going to protect the community as much as the opening opposition characterizes. Because teachers can just tell their students, like, hey guys, like you saw that guy smoking from your school, right? That's bad, okay? You shouldn't do that in the future, right? I think this is really reversible. But secondly, there are multiple narratives, as OG already said, that tell you that being swearing and being drunk is bad. Okay, so the opposition also said that like some people don't care about this. I think this is real unrealistic, and I'll rebut to this later, okay? Thirdly, let's talk about why people engage in antisocial behavior in the first place, okay? This is because of stress and uncontrollable factors, right? If you're in a financial crisis, it makes you 100 times more likely to actually drink, right? If you grew up in a white family that is really right wing and like has really racist values, it makes you 100 times more likely to say a racial slur in the public, right? Therefore, we think that's principally unjust to punish them, and we have better alternatives, which I'll talk about later. And second, punishing them is just going to make things worse, right? For example, if you are someone in a financial crisis and you go to jail, you're probably going to exacerbate their financial crisis because the moneymaker of the family probably isn't there to make money for you, okay? Thirdly, they know that things like drinking and swearing are bad, but they can't help themselves from doing it, right? The majority of people in the status quo already know, like, hey, like if I drink, I'll probably get addicted. If I drink, I'll probably face the consequences, right? The reason why they still drink though is because they are going through immense stress, and that's an uncontrollable factor. That's something called addiction. That's an uncontrollable psychological factor that OO doesn't talk about, okay? So there is this urgency that OG or OO doesn't mention in any of their speeches, which is why I think ultimately we win, okay? But moving on, instead of punishing these behavior, I think we should invest more of our capital on real crimes, right? Things such as murder that are more important, that actually cause like real direct third-party harms, right? And things like racial slurs are already met by social backlash in the status quo. Okay, so it's unjust to punish these people again because that will classify as double jeopardy. Third, I think our alternative is pretty simple. It's on rehabilitation. Rehabilitation for antisocial behavior, I don't think it's really costly. I think punishing the people that grew up in a gangster village would be less effective than actually funding the improvement of the village itself so that no more weird people come out of the gangster village, okay? Art may say that this is resource inefficient, but we tell you that this is way more efficient than tracking down every single person that has used a racial slur in front of a minority. And for rebuttals, the main point that OO seems to bring us is that they create better social norms. Okay, for rebuttal number one, sure, we'll bite the bullet and say that deterrence does happen, but still this doesn't mean that the interior problems behind these actions are actually solved. Putting a full-on blanket ban on racial slurs doesn't mean that the prejudice against black people is going to be solved, right? We think that our alternative on rehabilitation actually teaches people why you shouldn't be using racial slurs in the very first place. Rebuttal number two, there are already many narratives that try to prevent these things from happening. For example, these things happening. So I think that the majority of these cases happen like when people are under like extreme mental conditions. They also talk about how like people are more likely to report like things like racial slurs, but we say that people are going to get scared if people get arrested for drinking, so they get reported anyways in the status quo, right? They also talk about how like some people don't care about what people think about them, okay? Three rebuttals. First of all, this is a very unrealistic characterization because any average person would care about how people think about them. Second, I think that people can just do like these things underground, right? People can drink underground, people can smoke underground, and like all they have to do is just not get caught by the government, which makes it really like inefficient on their side. Thirdly, if someone really wants to smoke in front of elementary schoolers, this is a really minority case, so the impact of this is really mitigated under their side. Rebuttal number four, we think that we can just say the same thing for their side, right? People may not care about their financial needs. People might not care that they go to jail, right? We can just say the same thing for their side, which makes their argument kind of weird, okay? So first, extension on how this is principally unjust. Many people become antisocial because of factors irrelevant to their actual morality, right? Things like financial needs, things like if you broke up a few weeks earlier, you probably want to get drunk, right? Therefore, it's unjust to punish these people because of their like social background or whatnot. Second, antisocial behaviors are crimes against yourself, right? So I think it's justified for a person to commit antisocial behavior, which is well within your rights. Second extension on how their side creates more recidivism rates. Okay, sending people to jail just increases people's stress, right? Charging them funds also just increases their stress, okay? But antisocial behavior orders fail to target the main reason why people do these things in the very first place, right? Not drinking wine is probably going to make you more stressed out. Like getting fined, you probably want to drink more if you get you'll probably want to drink more because you're in more financial burden and you'll probably go through more stress, which will make you want to drink more. So what's the impact of this? I think that you'll be forced to drink again because of the temptation and because of the need, because you're in more of a financial crisis than you were in earlier, and you probably want to do it undercover because the government can't monitor like every single thing you're doing at home, and you'll probably want to drink more. You'll probably stand out from the community, and therefore I think it'll create more of a nuisance to society. Third argument, on how Derasite creates a toxic environment, on how people are scared for asking for help. So what are the impacts of this policy? I think people are going to get scared that they will be charged with antisocial behavior orders. The opposition might say this is good, but I'll explain to you now why this is actually bad. People get scared that they're going to get reported to the police or law enforcement agencies in case of asking for help, right? Psychologists and therapists can call for help, like because drinking is bad, and people are less likely to actually go to a therapist and say like, hey, I got a mental issue, can you please help me with this, because they know that they're probably going to get charged, they're probably going to get arrested or something, right? Fourth and final extension on how labeling people in general as antisocial is a morally bad thing. I think people are going to start thinking badly about themselves. When they go to jail, this negative identity is going to be magnified by the status quo, right? Because you're going to ask a policeman, like, why am I getting arrested here? It's because you're antisocial. That's just going to increase your moral like negativity, that you're going through like lots of stress. It's just going to increase the burden that's put upon your shoulders, that's already being put upon your shoulders by the status quo, okay? But what happens on our side, what happens in the comparative when these people don't go to jail? They can realize that they're doing and self-correct themselves by getting help, or they can seek rehabilitation lightheartedly, right? Under their side, people have to risk getting arrested if they want to seek help, right? This is a very unjust impact, because the reason why the government exists is to help these people with these problems in the first place, not to deter them from asking for help, right? For these reasons, I think that we win, because we're the side that characterizes why do these people commit these crimes in the very first place. For these reasons, I'm really proud to propose. Yeah.
So let's get straight into our 4 contributions from CG in this debate, right? Firstly, let's move on to rebuttal. So firstly, the Prime Minister talks about how like if there's like human nature, if someone prevents you from doing something, you want to do it more. Actually, when there are actions against something that someone is doing it wrong, then that's what prevents a human from doing something, right? For example, if we use government's logic, then the prevention of murder wants to make someone kill more people, right? That's ridiculous. And even if that's true, that's why there are laws to prevent these, right? These laws are there to actually stop or punish people when they do crimes. Now, for antisocial disorder orders, we can do this to a smaller degree because of the smaller degree to the harms to the public, right? We'll talk more about deterrence and extensions. Moving on to what DPM said about how governments are criminalizing small issues and doing anything to people, right? This is not true at all, right? This is why we have antisocial behavior orders for these behaviors rather than having actual criminal sentences for these crimes to punish these people, right? Government is completely misunderstanding antisocial behaviors because drinking, swearing, and etc. is not going to be punished if it's in private or if it's an environment or space where it's not in front of the outright public or strangers. Yes?
The arrest of women in Iran and Afghanistan for not wearing burqas is the ops world. You need to defend the use of behavior laws, which we told you represent repression of our rights and promotion of authoritarianism.
So antisocial behaviors are like being drunk, swearing, or being racist in public, right? The use of like not wearing burqas in public is like actually related to like religion, and it's not about like the antisocial behaviors that directly harm like the general public. So like so there's a clear line between swearing, joking, and drinking with your friends and just yelling racial slurs at a stranger in public where there are other people like children nearby, right? Government completely does not consider the most important stakeholders in this debate, the directly affected victims of public antisocial behavior, right? If someone swore at you with 5 bottles of soju breath in your ear, like would you be able to just go about your day with like a toddler child holding your hand? Like, of course, while just considering that this instance before is just a part of human nature, of course not, right? This is why we have these orders to prevent these types of issues in public, right? So thirdly, and MG talks about how why antisocial behaviors occur and how sending these people to jail isn't going to protect them. First of, and how we should invest in real crimes instead, right? Murders and other real crimes happen because of these antisocial behaviors. They stem from these behaviors because being allowed to drunk in public leads to like leads to like drunk driving, right? Being allowed to like call people slurs in public will lead to like violent fights and like just punching other people, which will lead to like actual crimes and injuries, right? No, thank you. So MG also talks about how people can just drink underground and smoke underground, and this will not prevent this at all, right? But drinking underground already exists, right? This is completely irrelevant to the debate because drinking underground in a private space is completely different from being drunk in the streets and catcalling at people, right? So MG also talks about how smoking in front of elementary schools is a minority. However, this is wrong because I can confirm that almost everyone in this room has seen someone smoking in front of them when they were walking home from school when you're a third grader. So like, yeah, no, thank you. So even if like it's just a minority or something, we think that this is like completely harmful to the public. And MG also talks about how people will be afraid to ask for help if they are just gonna get arrested. However, they can ask for help because if they're not like drunk while asking for help, then of course people are not going to arrest you, right? People don't arrest you for like before you're drunk in public, right? They only arrest you or like give you fines if you're seen like catcalling at someone in the streets at night or something. Moving on to our extensions, so let's talk about deterrence, right? ASBO serve as a deterrent by legally restricting individuals from engaging in these communities, right? So we need these fines and like punishments because these people are not innocent. So even if they made a mistake, they could have easily avoided it, right? This is why the only proportionate punishment would be to give them a fine or a restriction so that they can get warnings, but their life is not ruined based on a criminal charge, right? So why is this type of deterrence necessary? We'll tell you what type of realistic problems actually occur in the streets which opening lacks. So if we follow government's model and enter government's role where people are allowed to yell racial slurs in front of elementary schoolers and can just harass people after drinking like 7 bottles of beer, what do you think will happen on the side of the streets? Obviously, the surrounding people or like parents of those children will get mad, right? So of course they want to punish the perpetrators themselves because there's nothing else that the government is doing. So what will happen? People will like beat each other up because like what if someone's girlfriend was getting harassed by a drunk man? Obviously, like the boyfriend or something will come up and beat up the man, right? This will cause more fights and more violence in government side only. So secondly, moving on to a second extension about the protection for the general public and victims directly affected. Why is this protection important, right? Let's talk about the public's well-being. So many local residents feel unsafe knowing that there are no orders in place to protect them on the other side. Even though the antisocial behaviors, people should have a right to do what they want. In a public space, everyone has just as much as rights of what they do, and they are innocent. If they are innocent, they have more rights than the perpetrators. Hence, these local people should deserve to feel safe in their own homes and neighborhoods. So if someone vandalizes your property, you would not only want to you deserve compensation, right? If a drunk man harassed someone, then they deserve compensation. And without these fines, it would be near impossible to proportionately punish these people. So this is the authorities' responsibility and the law enforcement's responsibility to protect them, right? They are the people to implement and prevent such things from happening. And ASBOs are essential vehicles for managing these antisocial behaviors, right? These orders actually help allocate resources effectively and for the good of the general public. So let's talk about accountability without criminal records. These orders allow individuals to be held accountable for behaviors and actions they have done through fines and other ways, right? They are punished without getting a criminal record because although these people have engaged in criminal behaviors, these mistakes could have been avoided, right? But having an antisocial behavior orders actually allow people to be punished without like ostracizing them or like exposing them as an actual like criminal, right? This allows for people who have done antisocial behaviors to actually be held accountable without be taught this is wrong, rather than being able to do this all just because of freedom of speech. So antisocial behavior orders can be customized based on the specific punishments, leading to more flexibility overall. I'm so proud to oppose.
I think Tegu gives you the biggest and clearest definition of what and how antisocial actions are caused, right? He tells you more than what OG has told you. He tells you the impacts antisocial actions isn't that he tells you that impacts antisocial actions aren't as tantamount as other or more urgent things like bigger crimes. Alternatively, he tells you that a much more better alternative that could work is fixing regions like ghettos to house like better living conditions as a whole would be much more better as it impacts the most amount of people. He tells you that the amount of effort to cut down on antisocial actions the opposition brings in today's debate can be rather used in other efforts that is going to impact more and bigger issues and a bigger amount of people. I think I should just like reiterate on how opposition plays in today's debate and some recharacterization. Firstly, I think Tegu introduces a completely new and exclusive material on why ASB is even caused in the first place. What does he tell you? He tells you that really bad living conditions, like living in ghettos, causes bad role models that children kind of shape after. But I think Tegu also tells you that in response of this, that these kind of cases can't really be stopped with ASBOs. I think he tells you that generations of kids are going to like start smoking and drinking. Rather, he tells you that he will develop ghettos with like uses of like other policies to make a better and elongated long-term on like longer generations of kids. Secondly, I think there's a really big logical leap between being antisocial and causing a real crime. The example of drinking and being a drunk driver is a super like specific case, right? I think people like my own parents, for example, drink to celebrate, like drink after a long week of stressful work. I don't think my parents would go around causing a crime just because they drink. Thirdly, I think yes, report a person who says that they drink. I'll take that, Pure.
Basically, considering how the point about public safety is not a unique contribution from CO, are you saying that the people committing these antisocial actions should be prioritized over the vulnerable minorities that are subject to the consequences of these actions?
I think fixing the people who rather call like minorities like racial slurs would rather do better, because if we actually fix these people in the first place, I don't think minorities would like feel victimized in like bigger cases. I don't really get what you're trying to say. I think the police would rather try everything to tell people that people who drink are more likely to cause a crime in opposition's world, right? I think local residents and other people who see people drinking are going to feel unsafe because of the constant manipulation of people to think that antisocial behavior is going to cause crimes in massive numbers. I don't think I have no idea how the police would rather have a better way to cut this down. I don't know what opposition is trying to say. I think this is the only case that they should resort to. Fourthly, I think CO introduces absolutely no new material in this debate except for criminal records not stating like drinking or antisocial actions directly. But I think rather police would use these things in criminal records. There's no way to actively realistically deter crimes and antisocial actions without criminal records, right? People aren't going to learn when they know that there's going to be no imprint of what they do in their criminal actions. There's no realistic impact from this. I don't get what they're trying to say. I think CO therefore should not deserve the win in today's debate. Two clashes here. Firstly, on which side creates a better community in the long run. I think about the points about the authoritarian state that Ori stated is something that we can run under, but we say more, right? I think Tegu tells you a lot more. We talk about law enforcement. We tell you that law enforcement agencies are going to be pushing in everything they can to cut down on antisocial behavior as a whole. I think this requires, firstly, a lot of effort because you're cutting down on everything like drinking in a club. And secondly, it's unrealistic since no police force is going to be able to cut down on everything all at once. We told you that things like swearing, for example, is going to be something that's really hard to regulate, since swearing should be considered as an antisocial action because you're indirectly harming people. I don't know how the police will cut down on like every case of swearing. I think other people would report others who drank or like swear. I think people in by their nature are going to be scared when the police constantly tell them that drinking is something that's bad. I think people are going to rather turn their backs on society because they can't trust anyone, because the things that they actually want to do is something that they can't do, and that society can't really be trusted in this case. Tegu tells you the most and contributes the most about how society looks at ASB as a whole. He tells you that society views ASB as something that's not bad, but something that can be solved in the long term, right? Society on our side helps people to ask for help because they're not directly against them now. He tells you that he tells you that we do this better through what? Firstly, the solution. I think he tells you that society does its best to help people ask for help and for like therapists or like psychologists. Secondly, compared to opposition, people don't ask for help because they're scared that they're going to get reported or charged with being antisocial, because psychologists like those therapists are also going to be like fed information that like drunk people are going to be more likely to cause cause of crime, especially if you're doing something on a regular basis. I think it's super hard to stop, and charging people with being antisocial is just something that's completely horrendous. I think we solve this better by giving them the help that they actually need. Thirdly, on the point about the thing that the campaigns and organizations don't really work, I think the more important point here is that society helps people to ask for help. But I think campaigns should still exist. People know that there's a net that they're going to be caught by if campaigns still exist, right? They know there's a last resort that they can ask for help. Yet again, we tell you that society is something that is also a safety net on our side. I think this is super exclusive because firstly, OG didn't mention a thing about how society can be used in order to help diminish antisocial actions. And secondly, because opposition bench runs with the principle of outlining antisocial behavior in itself as something that should be stopped by any means. We tell you that society, therefore, also turns their back on people who commit antisocial actions and don't have a thing of helping them. I think we provide this better because Tegu tells you that society is something that's really, really helpful. He tells you that local residents will help people who drink in our society. I think people who sometimes drink and drive, I think that can be also really easily prevented by minor use of the police, and also because other parents, other family members, and other friends are going to help people not drink and drive. Second clash on which side better diminishes or lives alongside antisocial behavior. I think Tegu wins in today's debate. Why? Firstly, he talks about the negative identities. Labeling people as antisocial is bad because people start to think badly about themselves, right? I think he tells you that once people start to turn their backs against these people who are quote unquote antisocial and they go to jail, that negative identity is constantly multiplied. When they don't go to jail, rather, they can realize what they're doing and self-correct themselves by getting help. We tell you that our whole model basically works out in the long run because they can seek rehabilitation and they can also seek help from other peers or other friends because they know there's a safety net who can always catch them. I think in the long term, our model works the best because firstly, society doesn't turn their backs against people who commit antisocial actions. And secondly, because everyone in our society, even if we're not a utopia, creates a certain function in which people who commit antisocial actions can at least be, helped in the long term. For these reasons, more than proud to propose. Thank you.
Moving directly onto our first clash, which side better protects the persecutors? Now, Judge, we have told you as closing opposition that there should be a limit put on people's freedom when it starts to bleed into other people's rights of feeling safe. The other side, government, claims that they are preventing authoritarianism. Meanwhile, in reality, they're actually raising a higher tolerance for putting one's right above another. Right now, Judge, there are multiple legal frameworks surrounding ASBOs. This includes safeguards to prevent abuse, right? So rather than these orders, we will focus on improving the oversight and accountability mechanisms to ensure that they are not misused by the government. Eliminating ASBOs as a whole would remove a necessary tool for maintaining public order, especially in a country where people are indeed not oppressed, but from a country known for giving ridiculous amounts of freedom to the wrong people. Now, not only that, even if we do take the case of government side on how other countries are far too oppressive, there are distinctions between ASBOs and authoritarian laws and just general government corruption, right? Israel, Iran, and all of those other countries oppressing its people through these quote-unquote ASBOs or whatever laws they have is not the problem of the ASBOs, but rather it is the problem of the Israeli and Iran government, which is corrupt with or without these enforcements. Yes.
Don't you think that we should focus on the real problems of society, like murder or arson, instead of focusing on prosecuting people who swear?
Okay, so we already do focus on that, right? There are already laws. There's possibly nothing much more that we can do. If there was something more that we could do, why would your side not propose those ideas, right? Now we say that since those issues are currently not even as big as these issues, we believe that it is time to shift our focus, and we will shift it once again if that issue becomes worse. So if we were to prove the burden that the government side proposes, we believe that these people should be limited because other people deserve to feel safe, right? So, Judge, if we were to put a comparative here, we deter more of these actions. The other side is just trying to blatantly justify these actions instead of proving to us why their case is justified in terms of how they're going to have any check and balances implemented. Now, Deputy Prime Minister of the other side comes up here and claims that people who are penalized are going to cut corners. Judge, they first of all provide absolutely no mechanism to this, and second of all, no thank you. People are more likely to stop doing what they have been doing when they finally realize that they're going to be just as equally harmed as the people who had to watch these nuisances in public. Now, even if the government side asks us these radically stretched examples, if a mother swears at her child, that is much more regulated. Because first of all, you should focus on the community, not family dynamics within the scope of the debate, right? ASBOs are designed specifically to address behaviors that disrupt public order and community safety, not to regulate private
private family matters. Hence, the government side fails to stay on topic within this debate. Even so, if their parents don't swear just a few times but verbally abuse their children, there is another form of punishment and framework. I will take the POI.
There are inherent trade-offs to this. Are we hiring more police officers or engaging in tracking down more murderers? Please engage.
What we are saying is that we're going to keep the legal framework right now that we have, but put closer monitoring to these people who commit these heinous acts, right? Because the other side just wants to diminish all of these orders and make it so that these people who do not deserve these rights anymore, at least to this extent, keep on getting their rights to bleed into other people's lives, right? Now, how do we protect the persecutors to begin with? Judge, multiple layers. First of all, we make it so that it is less likely that people take things into their own hands. If there is a local town and there are groups of people that constantly swear at you, constantly harass you and your neighbors, and nothing happens, how would the local people react? Would they be scared of these people? Probably, but they would also be extremely enraged, right? They would feel as though there's no choice but to take things into their own hands, and things will end up being much more complicated and escalating like much more than it needs to be. So at the end of the day, we are the only ones as closing opposition who can actually fulfill a proportionate preventive measure. Also, we prevent these people from reoffending or committing even worse events from taking place, right? Now we would like to move on to our second and last clash of this debate, which side achieves a safer public space. Now, to begin with, the government side, no thank you, claims that rioting is free speech until it is disruptive, and so is swearing until it is blatant. But Judge, we need to clarify something here, right? If someone says something so quietly to the point that nobody hears it, it obviously would not be reported to the authorities in the first place. So that means that if someone does get charged for saying a racial slur out loud, that means someone, if not multiple people, heard it and got extremely uncomfortable in a public space that they deserve once again to feel safe in. Now, Judge, with that being said, we would like to give you a weighing mechanism here, right? Who should we be protecting more? The general local community or the people who commit these disorderly acts? The local community should always be put first, right? Because we believe that the opening opposition side did not elaborate on this point. So we will tell you right now that these people both have freedom, but naturally you are innocent until proven guilty of forcing people to deal with them, forcing people to breathe in their cigarettes air, and forcing people to be scared as they walk or even drive outside. And these people, the government side wants to justify, have been proven to be guilty of reaching more guidelines society has already set. So in this case, the government's responsibility is to protect the innocent and the vulnerable. The innocent are not only the most vulnerable in the status quo, but they're likely going to have a higher headcount as well, right? So now, since the other side has failed to tell us why the prosecutor should be so heavily guarded, I will present another comparative. Now, the government side says that they should not punish being drunk, they should punish drunk driving. They should not punish racial slurs, but they should punish racial discrimination. But the problem with this is, Judge, on the other side's best case, things happen after the victim has already been scarred. On the other side, they know, thank you, let the car crash happen, they let discrimination happen, etc., and try to fix it afterwards. Except things are not always reversible as they want it to be, right? If the person side government get hit by the car dies, nothing can ever compensate for the person who didn't get to live their life or the victim's family who have to live without them, right? On our side, we prevent these tragedies from happening in the first place. Now, why did none of the alternatives given from side government work? Because first of all, they say that rehabilitation is much better. But rehabilitation takes too much time, first of all, and it is impossible to implement for all people because people want to deny this if they are so addicted. Even so, Judge, them promoting rehabilitation is contradictory to their own case to certain extents. Let's say that the people deny rehabilitation. Will the impact be what they say it will be, or will it be a minuscule scale? Probably the latter, right? And even if the other side wants to say that people won't always get a choice to get rehabilitated or not, in that case, that goes against their primary framework and priority that revolves around the non-existent limit of rights that people have. Lastly, the other side claims that people are scared that they're going to get reported to the authorities if they reach out for help on our side. In that case, we can make this more clear to the people that they're not going to get punished for being addicted. We make it clear enough that people will get out of punishment, not into trouble if they try, and for those reasons, never been prouder to oppose. Thank you.